He's moving stuff everywhere, but he's doing right. I've learned a little bit about all this, so. Well, are y'all going to have your mother-in-law back with y'all tomorrow?
Oh, she's not left us. We're not letting her.
I knew we were taking her home for a couple of days. I didn't know she
Well,
came back.
we went and got her mail because they hadn't started forwarding it yet, and she wants to go and spend a few days over there, but we're not mentioning it because we don't want her to think we're trying to rush her. So it's just when she wants to, you know. I have a hunch she'll. I mean, I don't, Holly. I think I'll be surprised if we're not still doing this into the summer. No, I don't mean this. You'll have a pastor by then, but I mean I think we'll be social distancing till then.
I hope not. I want to take me to Bible school.
Do what?
I want to have vacation Bible school with my kids.
I understand that.
We've already missed the major egg hunt with them.
Now, if I have Daniel, if I have a cough like that, rather than us starting over, I'll just say excuse me, and then we'll pick up. Okay.
Yeah,
unless if I spew on the screen, forget what I just said. We'll start over. All right. Hey, that reminds me. Let me make sure I got a handkerchief. So yeah. Okay. How are we gonna do this? Have I?
Whenever you're ready, we can get going to it. And I'm gonna turn off my phone.
All right. What do you want me to count to?
We can count 3, 2, 1, and go, kind of thing.
Let's give it to 10 because I'm gonna cut my phone off and turn off the sound.
Okay.
All right. 1.
We'll call you back when we're all done.
Okay. 1, 2. Hi, I'm David Jones, the interim pastor at Chapel Hill United Methodist Church in Rome, Georgia. Some of you know that because we were together for a number of weeks before this social distancing began. But if you're just tuning in and happen to find us, I wanted to let you know who I am and where I'm coming from. This is Easter Sunday morning. It's very different for all of us for a number of reasons. I want to tell you how I've opened Easter services for years. I would ask the ushers to get the sanctuary just as dark as could be. And there was no prelude, there was no call to worship, there was no processional. The chancel was empty, choir loft was empty. It was dark as we could get it. When it reached 11 o'clock, a woman would walk out to the center of the chancel. I always asked a woman to do this because the women were the first to discover the empty tomb. The women were the first to spread the word of the risen Lord. The women were the first evangelists. And so a woman would walk out and then she would read whichever gospel reading had been appointed by the lectionary for that Sunday. This year, it comes from Matthew, 21st chapter, verses 1 through 10. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, the angel rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Don't be afraid. I know that you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He isn't here. He's risen just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. And then quickly go and tell his disciples he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid, yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. Greetings, he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshiped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." God always blesses the reading and hearing of his holy word. I am 68 years old now. Being a Methodist pastor, the son and grandson and great-grandson of Methodist pastors, I can tell you that there have been 68 Easters in my lifetime, and I have been at church on all of them. In fact, I can't even begin to imagine how many worship services in all I've been to in my life. It's easily in the thousands. But there are some services that stand out above others. And one of those was a service at Glen Memorial United Methodist Church on the Emory campus, where I was later to serve as the senior pastor for 7 years. But this was earlier than that. Here's the date. I remember it exactly. It was the evening of January 16th, 1991. The preacher was Dr. Gardner Taylor, one of the preeminent preachers in the country. In fact, Time magazine called Dr. Taylor the Dean of American Preaching. He was there because he was one of the featured preachers for an annual event that Candler School of Theology used to put on called Ministers Week. Hundreds of Methodist preachers from all over the South attended each year. I remember it as if it was yesterday. The service that night began just 1 hour after the news media announced that the United States had launched the first airstrike of what came to be known as the Persian Gulf War. It was a perilous time. Anxieties were running high. Everyone knew that, and Dr. Taylor certainly knew it. When he stood to preach, he told us that in light of events, he was abandoning the sermon that he'd planned to preach. He said, "I want to remind you that all times are perilous." And then he told the story of the installation of the magnificent carillon in the tower of Concord Baptist Church, where he served as senior pastor for 42 years. He said when the installation was finished, the trustees asked him, "What time of day should we set the bells to ring?" Dr. Taylor said, "Without a moment's hesitation, I told them, set them to ring at 7:30 in the evening, right after people have listened to the long, unrelieved list of disasters on the nightly news." This Easter comes during a season when there is little relief from the list of disasters. It's no exaggeration to say that this is one of the darkest periods the world has experienced in decades. Before this Easter morning, I want to remind you that this Easter morning, I want to remind you that the world is not entirely dark. Let me tell you something else about those years when the Persian Gulf War broke out. That was when many of us first became acquainted with a piece of military equipment known as night vision equipment. It enabled our armed forces to keep fighting after sundown. That's nothing unfamiliar to us these days, but in those days it was brand new. And some of you are old enough like me to remember the scenes on the nightly news of the bombing of Baghdad. That those scenes were shot using night vision equipment. I was fascinated by it. In fact, I was so curious about that technology that I went to the library. You remember what a library is, don't you? A library is where they keep books. You remember what books are, don't you? Well, I went to the library to learn more about night vision equipment and how it worked. And here's what I discovered. You may have already known this. Even on the darkest of nights, there's always light from the stars and the moon that we can't pick up with the naked eye. But night vision equipment picks up the starlight and the moonlight that's reflected by objects in the field of view. And then it electronically amplifies that light so the person using the equipment can see as clearly as if it were day. I also remember that one of my colleagues suggested that you and I think of the Bible, now listen, that we think of the Bible as an instrument we can use to amplify the light so we can see what we need to see in spite of the darkness that we're in. Now, please don't understand me. There's a big difference between night vision equipment and rose-colored glasses. I am not talking about putting on rose-colored glasses. Some people do. It's what they do when times are tough and they become naively optimistic. They conclude that we have the intellect, the technology, the good intentions we need to make everything in the world right before noon tomorrow. Even religious people can get caught up in naive optimism. But life has a way of bringing us back to earth. Last Sunday, as we were together, I mentioned Scott Peck, a psychiatrist whose first book, entitled The Road Less Traveled, soared to the top of the bestseller list and stayed on the bestseller list for 10 years. His second book isn't as well known, but I believe it's the more important of the two. The title of his second book is People of the Lie. Now, as I tell you this, keep in mind that Scott Peck wrote it before he became a Christian. In People of the Lie, he makes the point that there is such a thing as evil in this world. But he said later, I had trouble finding a definition of evil because there is no such word as evil in the literature of psychiatry. So he said, one day I asked my son, who was a little boy at the time, if he could tell me what evil is. And quick as a wink, my son said, Daddy, evil is live spelled backwards. Evil is live spelled backward. And that is where Scott Peck got his definition of evil. Evil is the opposite of life. Evil is whatever destroys life. The gospel of Jesus Christ knows all about evil. And one of the ways you can tell that is that there's a cross in the gospel. And the cross was ugly business by any standard. The religious and political authorities conspired to murder an innocent young man and then condemned him to die a cruel death nailed to a cross. The cross is the sign of the incredible power of the evil Jesus was up against. And on Good Friday, there was almost enough evil to do him in, which is why you and I shouldn't be naively optimistic about life. There was almost enough evil to do Jesus in. Almost, but not quite. Evil was powerful, but not all powerful. And that's why you and I shouldn't be unduly pessimistic either. We shouldn't be unduly optimistic, but we have to work, if you're like me, you have to work against being unduly pessimistic. Remember this, on Good Friday, the forces of evil says, okay, here it comes. This is everything we've got. This is the whole 9 yards. Here it comes right at you. And it was almost enough. It came close enough that anyone who loved Jesus, followed Jesus, believed in Jesus was utterly shattered by 3 o'clock that afternoon. On Good Friday, evil showed its hand. And then, on Easter morning, God showed God's hand. It's almost like God said they need a little while to absorb how powerful evil is, so they're never able to persuade themselves that it's not real and not horribly strong. Then on Easter morning, God said, now it's my turn. Now it's time for me to show my hand. The message God sent on Easter morning is that despite all appearances to the contrary, you and I can live knowing, listen to me, you and I can live knowing that God's power is greater than all the evil powers that tried to finish Jesus off. Easter means the powers of evil are no longer on the throne. Christ is on the throne, and God's final victory is guaranteed. Now, here's a qualifier. Easter doesn't mean you and I don't have a fight on our hands, both around us and within us. You see, the powers of evil haven't admitted yet that they're defeated. Let me try this illustration. Like me, some of you have friends and relatives who fought in World War II. Maybe some of them even stormed the beaches on D-Day. D-Day sealed the fate of the Third Reich. The successful storming of those beaches assured that the Allies would be victorious, that they would triumph. You see, the decisive victory had been won, but oh my soul, what a mop-up operation still lay ahead. Now here's the parallel. In the cosmic contest between good and evil, D-Day was Easter. The decisive battle was won then and there, but oh my soul, what a mop-up operation we're still engaged in. You see, evil gets entrenched and it doesn't want to move. Evil puts its feet down and it refuses to budge. And usually someone has to suffer to overcome it. That's the nature of evil. And that's where God's people come in, you see. When God's people are faithful, when we're willing to pray and to work for good, God can use what we do, what you and I do, what others like us do to overcome evil and thus move the world closer to the way God intended it to be. There's a short little book in the Bible that we usually just pass right over, but it's one of my favorites in large part because of a phrase in that book that has come to mean a lot to me. The little book is called The First Letter of John. You can read it in less than 10 minutes. But the whole book is worth it to me for this phrase. John says, the darkness is passing. The darkness is passing. John says there's still plenty of darkness in the world, but he says, listen, he says every time someone performs a Christ-like act of love, the darkness of this world passes a little bit more, and holy light seeps in. That's what Michael Curry, the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church in America, was getting at this week. When he said this, he said, the empty places of worship and even the empty stadiums and stores and coffee shops are actually signs of hope. This is what he said. He said, they're signs that maybe love is winning again. Love for neighbor that is strong enough to sacrifice our important gatherings. Love that gives up our cherished celebrations to save lives. The lives of other children of God we don't even know. He said, maybe the empty houses of worship today are, in fact, a reminder that though it doesn't look like it, it's Easter anyway. The true story, one Saturday night, not too many years ago, I was lying in bed almost asleep. Saturdays for me were always a difficult time to fall asleep because my mind was full of what I wanted to say and I wanted God to help me say the next morning. And